Okay, folks, it's time that we gather around. So come on in and take a seat. Make yourself comfortable.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who may not know, my name is Father Michael Peterson. I'm the pastor here at St. Rita's. It looks like most people here are from St. Rita's, so you all know, huh? Well, maybe not. Nevertheless, I've been asked to welcome you, and I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to welcome you to our gathering this evening and this third of our series. This particular evening will be spent discussing or reflecting on community and participation. And thank you for coming out. Appreciate your being here.
I have our opening prayer for the evening. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All too often, Lord, we turn away from the world's many problems, which seem too big, too complex, or too far away. Forgive us our indifference. It's easier, Lord, to see only what is around us, our lives, our homes, our challenges. Forgive us our isolation. Help us to see with your eyes which notice one another and help us understand. Help us to dream your dream of communities that reach out and dialogue and where diverse people creatively cooperate. Help us to be people of solidarity and action, so moved by prayer, encounter, and understanding that peace can become a reality. We have a special prayer tonight for one of our religious ed students who has been up at Children's Hospital for several days and will be for several more. So prayers for her, please, as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It's good to see you all here tonight. I was telling my sister Lisa on the way in here, I always get nervous because I think we're going to be up here and just have an empty church and just have a few speakers. So it's nice to see you all here tonight. So thank you for coming. As Father mentioned, this is our third talk, and these talks are hosted by the Human Concerns Committee, and it's really carrying out that part of our mission that is about justice education. So trying to educate our high schoolers, certainly, and the rest of the parish on issues of justice, peace and justice. And we've chosen the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching as kind of the basics for these talks. And so tonight is on the call to community and participation. And so just in a little bit, I just want to talk a little bit about our speakers tonight, but we'll have a short video from the USCCB on that issue to give us a little explanation of what that is, because these themes sometimes are not always easy to understand. And so it's nice having a little bit of a kind of a grounding in it. And then we'll listen to our speakers tonight from the Racine Interfaith Coalition talk about how that theme is lived out, how it's actually, what it looks like in real life. So, but by the way, on the video, it also talks about call to family. And that issue we're going to be handling by itself on the May 21st talk, which is our next talk. So even though the video talks about family and community and participation, the family part of that will be a separate talk on May 21st. So, we're happy to have Rick here tonight. It's been a while, hasn't it? We've been working on this for some time, and we're finally having you here. So we're really happy that you've come. The first speaker tonight will be Tammy Hayward, one of the co-presidents, and she's going to talk about the history of the Racine Interfaith Coalition. Got a long history here in the community, and she was with it from the very start. So she knows that very well. And then our next speaker, the other co-president, is Linda Boyle. And Linda's been with Rick a long time as well. And she'll go over all the different task forces that Rick has. And there's a lot of them. And so she knows that very well. There'll be a little bit of a PowerPoint with her talk. And then lastly, Carl Fields. Carl has been working here in the Racine community, doing a lot of social justice work for a while. And I'm just so happy that Carl came tonight. He's a busy guy. But so we're happy. We're happy. So after those talks, we'll take a break. We'll take a 10-minute break. There are beverages and snacks out in the narthex, so take a chance to go out there. And at that point, our high schoolers will adjourn so that they can talk amongst themselves, kind of debrief, and talk about what they've heard tonight. And then after the 10 minutes, the rest of us will come back in, and we can talk a little more, and Linda and Tammy and Carl can answer questions, talk about maybe one of the task forces or whatever ones that you might be interested in. And then we'll just have a short wrap-up and a closing prayer. So that should close us out about 7:30. So, okay? All right. So, let's start with this short video, and then after the video, then Tammy will start us off.
God created us as people to be sacred, to worship Him, but also to be social beings, to love and to live in community and care for one another. Family is really the first school of communications. It's really the first place that we learn to love, to be loved, to give of ourselves, so that we're prepared to go out into a community and to serve other people.
I see families and their role as central to the life of society. We're nurtured in family. We come to birth in family. We find our purpose in family.
Society really begins with marriage and family. If family is broken, if marriage is broken, if our relationships there at the most basic level are broken, society really can't function as it should, at the service of others, with love for others, with compassion for others.
Community is rooted in our faith. From the very beginning, God Himself, who is community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, at the core of the universe, is a relationship. It makes perfect sense that we as human beings were made to live in relationships rooted in love.
As parishes, we're called to engage in the community in which we live. We're not supposed to be bystanders or mere observers, but instead we're supposed to get in there and live and listen and love the people that God has placed around us.
Most of us are not happy to simply be acted on. We want to act for ourselves, we want to act for others. And so participation isn't just saying you get to vote, although it includes that. It's saying we will equip you, we will give you access to the resources and the opportunity you need so that not only can you occasionally say something, but that you can come in and have an impact in a situation.
Within our family, we've really tried to emphasize our own little domestic church as part of the broader church. It means taking what we learn as people of faith and then putting it into practice, going out into community and being Christ's hands and feet to those people that we see that are in need.
Subsidiarity is one of those great Catholic words. It comes from the root subsidium, help.
Subsidiarity is allowing the different levels of society to do the job for which they were made. It doesn't mean that occasionally, when those institutions can't do their job, that they get help from larger institutions. But fundamentally, it's a recognition that society is an organic reality with different levels of authority, from the individual to the nuclear family to the government, the church, that all of these have a role to play in making a healthy life together for all of us.
We can appreciate how we have to be involved with different levels, responding to different needs. Not experts coming from the outside, but neighbors helping one another.
At the heart of reality, we're all made social beings. There's a modern myth that says we're all just autonomous individuals. It's just not how we experience life. Who of us would want to live without friendship? That's the fullness of who we are, because it's in relationship we can live love. And when we live love, then we have the joy of the gospel.
Deacon Greg is racing to the back to make sure I can be heard from here, and yes, I can. Okay. Thank you for coming. We're very happy to be invited to share Rick's story with you tonight. And I am Tammy Hayward. I'm one of the co-presidents of Rick. Linda's going to follow me, and then Carl. And Ree Wider, our organizer, is sitting in the second row, so 4 of us are here tonight. And once I get my glasses on, I can start. Can anyone here name me one thing of note, one important thing that happened in 1993? I won't look over here at the kids because they obviously weren't even born then. Hopefully your parents were born then, but think about that. Anybody? 1993? Well, that's okay. You weren't born then, or for those of us who were, 30 years has taken its toll. And so much has changed since then that it's difficult to remember a specific year. As a historian, and because I looked it up, I can tell you a few things. There was a devastating earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan with a great deal of loss of life. The Pentium microprocessor was introduced. I think that has to do with computers, but don't count me in on that. I'm not really sure. It just sounds like it. There was a government raid on a well-armed anti-government cult in Waco, Texas. I do remember that ended in many deaths through misunderstandings and misdirection. The World Trade Center was bombed, causing some loss of life, but not nearly the devastating horror of 9/11/2001. And that was when the Twin Towers collapsed. And that has pretty well erased the memory, our collective memory, of that earlier event, but I do remember it. And then, of course, Beanie Babies went on sale for the first time in 1993, and probably some of us remember that. But here in Racine, in 1993, a small group of people of faith, a variety of different denominations, began working to create what is now Racine Interfaith Coalition. They saw the need for social justice for those who lack the wealth and the power to demand justice for themselves. These same folks reached out for help to Milwaukee, where MICA, which is the Milwaukee Inner City Congregations Allied for Hope, had recently been formed with much the same goal in mind. And they also reached out to Gamaliel, named after a biblical figure you'll remember, which is a national group whose purpose was justice advocacy. And that had been formed in Chicago about 5 years before. So that means that Rick is 30 years old. We are celebrating a birthday this year, and Gamaliel is celebrating its 35th birthday this year. After applying to become a nonprofit, a 501c3, and coming up with a name, we weren't terribly imaginative, Racine Interfaith Coalition. We thought, well, that says it all. You know, some of our affiliate members across the state have come up with names of saints, names of prophets and whatnot, and fit things to go in with them. We just laid it right out there, Racine Interfaith Coalition. We hired our first organizer after that. She came to us from MICA. Her name is Anna Garcia Ashley, and she is now the executive director of Gamaliel, our national organization. That's something we're incredibly proud of. She went from us and moved step by step up the ladder and is now national executive director. She directed our early efforts and taught us many things as our leadership among us became organized and trained to do more. After several years, as Anna began to move up the line, a new organizer came to us in the person of Angela James. Angela continued to work for our growth and success and led us for a number of years. She has just been named the director of the Race and Power Institute, a part of Gamaliel. which was inaugurated at a November meeting of several hundred of Gamaliel's leaders, affiliate leaders, from all over the United States, including 5 of us who went, 4 of us that are here, and 1 more. This institute will work continuously to end systemic racism, which has been the main focus of Gamaliel and all of our affiliates across the country over the last 8 years, knowing that Gamaliel is the most racially diverse of all organizations in the United States. So this should be our main mission then. Beginning with 10 churches, of which my church and the Racine Dominicans were 2, Rick has grown to 28 congregations and now includes not only all Christian denominations and many non-denominational Christian churches, excuse me, but the Unitarian Universalists, Muslims, and Jews. We are more diverse religiously than any of the other affiliates here in Wisconsin, part of Wisdom. By the way, Wisdom, which is our state organization, was created by Rick and Micah in Milwaukee and the then newly formed Cush in Kenosha. Knowing that we couldn't just stay here in southeast Wisconsin, we had to reach out across the state in order to do the work of social justice. So we created that in the year 2000. Now we have 11 city affiliates all around the state, and we also have an affiliate of the Menominee Reservation called Menniconnicum. Say that fast real twice, a number of times, but I learned Menniconnicum. As well as Expo and Free, which are made up of ex-incarcerated persons organizing. This is more affiliates than any 3 other states in the United States have that are connected with Gamaliel. So we're proud of that. We're big. When we come to national organizations, everybody kind of looks around and goes, whoa, there's 25 people here from Wisdom, because we have that many. Wisdom has been a leader in creating statewide issues, which eventually are adopted by the national organization and now are national issues. The first one was, we now call it transformational justice, but initially it was just criminal justice reform, reforming the criminal justice system because it's badly broken. The second one was immigration reform because that system is very badly broken too. So to clarify, because there'll be a quiz, not really. Rick is in Racine, Wisdom is all Wisconsin, and Gamaliel is our nationwide group. Among Rick's early notable successes were securing $6 million in low-interest loans from our local banks for first-time home purchases and home repair. And this went to people who aren't normally able to secure loans from banks. So it went to people of color, people who lived in poverty, etc. Today, that would be worth well over $1 billion, probably several billion. I tried to look it up and I was unable to figure it out. I was never a math teacher. This resulted in 358 loans in that one single day that we ran this event. And there was also financial advice and planning offered free of charge by the banks that were offering these loans. After identifying the need, this is the second point, identifying the need for more mentoring programs for our city's youth, we made people aware of this need at a large public meeting we held, which was at St. Richard's, and that led to UW Parkside creating a mentoring accreditation organization that helped to create and oversee more mentoring groups in the Racine and Kenosha area that would help the young people in our cities. Then we closed 14 drug houses in the inner city of Racine by singing and praying as 200 of us marched around the blocks in which these drug houses were located, making it exceedingly uncomfortable for drug lords and drug dealers to continue their work, knowing that we all knew where they were. This led to 55 arrests and 31 convictions, as well as our neighborhoods feeling a lot safer. We also secured a 10 times stiffer financial penalty for landlords who knowingly rented to drug dealers in our town. It went from a $100 fine, which was a slap on the wrist, to a $1,000 fine, which took some thinking about for a landlord. Then 25 years ago, we began the prayer vigils, which we still hold on site of any violent death in the Racine community, because we believe that no life that is lost should not be acknowledged and mourned by our community as a whole. It shouldn't just pass by with a little headline in the paper. Working along with NAMI, which shares the building where our office is with us, but is the National Association for the Mentally Ill, we secured a drug and alcohol court for Racine County. We were one of the very early ones to do this. And some years later, Greg was involved at this time, we made it possible to have a doubling of the number of potential participants. At first, it was only going to be 25 people that could be involved in that, going to drug court instead of going to jail, and getting help instead of just incarceration. Now we have 50 potential places for such folks. We also work to establish HALO, which you all have heard about, as a permanent homeless shelter in our community, with members of RIC serving on the board for several of its first years. We help to establish new and more stringent policies for renewing liquor licenses in the city, at the request of several of our inner-city churches, in neighborhoods affected negatively by bars that ignored the city ordinances that were already there, and through the work of our task force, which was known as Sacred Ground at that time. We secured a grant and implemented a group called WOW, W-O-W, which stands for Women of Worth. It is a treatment center for addicted women in Racine, so they don't have to lose their children to foster care while they get help with their addiction problems. In the past, all such treatment had either gone just to men, or if women desperately needed it, desperately enough to risk losing their children, they got it in jail. But in jail, obviously, children aren't going to be there. So WOW was created, and it took 7 years to get that done. Had to work to get grants to start it up, and then to get people involved. And last time I heard, it was well over 150 women who had either ended their addictions and kept their children, or if they had previously lost them, got their children back because they were free of their addictions, and that's something to be really proud of. We also held 3 very successful gun buybacks after raising thousands of dollars each time in order to buy back those guns. There were many more successes and some failures, but even from the failures, we learned a great deal about building alliances and strategies, which enabled us to move forward. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Linda, who's going to tell you about our current task forces.
Hello, and thank you for being here. It's so good to see all of you, many friends, and many people that I know throughout working in Racine and through my faith. We have 3 task forces presently: immigration, transformational justice, and environmental justice. In the past, of course, as you heard from Tammy, we've had other task forces. We've had health and wellness and education. And right before COVID, we had a very active youth group, youth task force. We were very busy out in the community, but we had to not do that during COVID, so we'd like to restart that youth task force again at this point. I'm going to start by talking about immigration. It's the longest lasting task force that we've had over a period of time. I have an interest in immigration. I became interested as a child, young person about the age of some of the young people here. I was raised on a farm with migrant workers, and I had a good example of reaching out and outreach when my father reached out to the farmers to make sure all the migrant workers had proper housing. And as I moved here to become a teacher in Racine Unified Schools, I saw that there are many needs of the immigrant children in my classes. I also had an experience that led me to do something about it. I had been retired from teaching. I was substitute teaching at a school where immigration authorities, ICE, had brought a mother to school to say goodbye to her 3rd grade twin sons. And I knew at that moment that she would probably never see them again, and they would not have their mom to raise them. And I knew I was going to find out why that had happened and how it could be. So I reached out to Rick and I joined the Immigration Task Force along with Don Miller, who's my mentor, by the way, and Sister Joyce Quintana, who, God rest her soul, was such a wonderful person to work with. We grew our task force and we set up goals, and we realized that many of the children in our schools, by the way, 26% of the schools in Racine are of Latin background. And the young people know that there are children and young people in their classes that are from immigrant backgrounds. Some of their families may be documented and some may be undocumented. So we set up goals to educate the members of our member congregations and to create some political will for positive immigration reform. We developed a presentation through a PowerPoint called Exploring Immigration about what now has become a humanitarian crisis, why people come, the hardships faced, and to dispel some of the myths around immigrants in general. A second goal for the task force is to advocate for policies that keep families together. We know that keeping families together is very, very important to us as a task force. We have seen immigrant families separated by immigration authorities, and most often when someone is deported, it's the breadwinner of the family, leaving behind citizen children and families. And it has made a difference in our local community over time. That has led us to a third goal, to help immigrants understand their rights. We have done workshops, prepared family planning information, something they can put in writing, so when they are in the position of being removed from our society, that they would have it in writing, who would take care of their children, who their homes would go to, and so forth. We have met with policies, I mentioned policies a moment ago, with Senator Tammy Baldwin. We are meeting soon with Congressman Brian Stile. We have talked about the border and that situation recently. We've also talked about the DACA recipients, young people who were brought here before the age of 16 that have had some opportunities that are soon to be taken away. In the past, we've worked very closely with Paul Ryan about comprehensive immigration reform, and Sister Joyce was particularly impressive to Paul Ryan. He would listen to her, whatever she said. We have worked to support driver's licenses for individuals who are undocumented, along with our Wisdom immigration team across the state. We did this because we were starting to receive requests from farmers, manufacturing plants, the hospitality industry, and so forth, to lobby for policies. They ask us to lobby for policies, all of our affiliates across the state, to get their workers to the jobs safely. There are 14 states that allow driver's licenses for undocumented, but not Wisconsin. They know, and we have learned, that after 3 or more traffic citations, a person might be removed. For instance, if someone is stopped for a broken taillight, gets a ticket for that, and then also receives a ticket for not having a driver's license, it can go through the system pretty quickly. Immigrants will do the work that others will not do, and the workforce is needed. That's why the large corporations and groups have come to us. This issue is very important to our economy. 2 new projects came to us unexpectedly this year. One because of COVID. We had people reporting to us that they were being forced to go to work as undocumented without rights with COVID, bringing it home to their families in a disproportionate way, losing family members. We made a plea. We had an idea. We made a plea to the community, to those who thought they might not need their stimulus check, to put it in a fund. We held interviews, we gave a list of resources, and we really set up a strict criteria to work with undocumented. We were able to keep 110 families in their home through the time of COVID. The second unexpected outreach was that the government reached out to us to settle Afghan families. We'd never done that piece before. With Lutheran Social Services, Catholic Charities, Jewish Coalition, working across the country, we were asked to settle Afghan families for 1 year. These are the people we saw running for the airplanes and jumping onto the planes with their families. They were fleeing the Taliban, and the stories they brought with us were unbelievably miraculous in some ways that they were alive. We received 5 families here in Racine. Our member churches really stepped up. Sacred Heart Church currently has 2 Afghan families. St. Vincent de Paul partnered with North Point Methodist Church to support a family. St. Mesrob's Armenian Church and volunteers from RIC supported a family. Holy Communion Church took on a group, and another group is waiting for a family, Presbyterian Church and some other Lutheran churches. True interfaith, I would say. The families are here for a year. They will receive support from the government and from us, and they are mandated to learn English or they won't have that support. Many now have jobs, driver's licenses, and so forth, and a few families have moved to other areas where they have other Afghan family members. But we still have a few in our community, and you will see them in the schools. And I see young people walking down the street going to Wadowitz School from the Sacred Heart Church daily. We learned through a clinic from the Catholic Church and Amparo of the Lutheran Church that there is a severe immigration lawyer shortage. So another idea from us was to look at the program they suggested where members could become certified by the Department of Justice, the DOJ. A teacher from Carthage who is a member of our task force has become certified along with some pre-law students. It's very intense. It has taken a long time. And we are hoping soon to have a few days a month where we will open our office to those who need some help with information and paperwork, things that we can do with the oversight of one particular lawyer in the city. Out of the immigration came a program called Turn Up the Vote. This isn't really its separate task force, but it is connected to all of our task forces. We know it's our civic duty to vote and to make our voice heard in one way or another. We've always given rides to the polls with Rick ever since the beginning. But in 2011, we decided that we would do a little bit more. And the reason is we'd been out into the neighborhoods around our Rick churches, and we were hearing that people weren't understanding issues or even how to vote. As we listened to the concerns of people in neighborhoods, we discovered that they did not always know which branch of government could help with issues. We found that most of their concerns could be managed by local government, and that led us to helping people understand who can vote, where to vote, how to get registered, and when elections are held. Now, we are nonpartisan, and we provide very specific training to make sure that people understand that we are merely giving directions for this piece of it. We were handing out flyers and so forth at the doors, but that changed during COVID, and we've reached out through texting and setting up tables outside of pre-approved businesses. The areas we targeted this last election averaged between 50 and 60% turnout, where it was previously 20% voter turnout. Our successes have been by people power. For example, in this last election, we had 50 local volunteers. We reached 10,000 people digitally and 11,000 people in the field. We feel very successful with that. We also co-sponsor candidate forums. We had a mayoral forum we co-sponsored last week in this city. Please vote February 21st, by the way. There is a Supreme Court forum, informational forum at the library on February 18th at 1 o'clock. And we will be holding another mayoral forum March 2nd at Gateway. Just a few words about our Transformational Justice Task Force. By the way, that is co-chaired by Deacon Greg and Carl Fields. I will provide just a general overview of the work being done by this group because Carl will be sharing a lot, hopefully. We base our efforts around the Wisdom Transformational Justice Campaign, which promotes policies that prevent people from going to prison, to provide justice in the prisons, and to help people returning from prison to flourish in the community. One of the current campaigns is called TAD, Treatment Alternatives. We are asking for legislative support through our policy work for treatment for drug, alcohol, and mental illness to prevent increasing the prison population. It's called treatment instead of prison. Rick's recent activity has centered around court observer programs in Racine. We've set up some goals to benefit defendants by our presence in the courtroom while educating ourselves about court functions and through trainings by groups and individuals doing outreach and advocacy work in the area, to identify issues for further outreach, to expand awareness of the reality of court procedures, and to gather data for later use. That particular task force is growing quickly. You can always call or talk to Greg to find out how to become involved. It's very interesting. Last, we have decided that we are going to begin a RIC Environmental Justice Task Force. Why? We are in a time of species extinction. The news out there is not good. We know that. We need to change how we govern ourselves and how we use the land. We treat nature today as a commerce. It is an important movement expanding the sphere of protection, and the change is essential. I personally have an interest. I have grandchildren. I also can only imagine what my life would have been like if my parents were still alive. They died of brain cancer in the 70s, 10 days apart at the ages of 51 and 53, leaving 6 young children behind. They had lived along a small river where the pesticides in farm country had affected many in the area. After my parents' death, a study was done by the university proving why they had passed. I didn't need to know what the study said. I knew that it was from pesticides. I remember having to go into the house and while the planes came to spray the crops close to the farmyard, and my dad would be out there flagging the airplanes. Much was done at that time to try to clean up that small river, but knowing of contamination and consumption issues around water everywhere, I know not enough has changed. My vested interest continued here through teaching elementary science at North Park School, right over there, that isn't far from here, and helping to build a nature center with the cooperation of Riverbend Nature Center. So what will our task force look like? A piece must be to educate ourselves, jointly joining in with the Wisdom affiliates that are working on environmental justice through the Minneconaucum from the Menominee Nation, and working with Gamaliel on the national level around environmental racism, equity, and justice around the environment. Our local task force is just beginning. We're just organizing. And I took it back to the fact that we must discuss the spiritual reasons first for why we are doing this. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Care for the earth is mandated by God. So we looked at some of the different denominations. Father Ephraim Collegiate had provided us with a video about what the Armenian Church is doing around environmental justice. Sister Lisa Kane presented on the Laudato Si for the environmental justice document for the Catholic Church. She had traveled to Ireland and took a 10-week course to help develop that document, and she learned there that Ireland and Australia have placed rights of nature legislation right into their constitution. So we have developed 3 goals for our task force: to keep our faith and God's call to care for nature in mind at all times, to educate ourselves and find local allies and volunteers, and to implement a local campaign concerning lead abatement. Lead poisoning of children, thank you. Lead poisoning of children has been a major issue in our area, due primarily to the existence of lead paint in older homes, specifically homes that have been built between 1978. And teaching in this area, I know many of the homes have been purchased before 1978. Because lead poisoning of children has a direct impact on their educational success and the future of our community, we are developing a major campaign. There are no safe levels of lead in the body, and lead poisoning causes permanent damage, even at very low levels. Lead exposure affects the brain's ability to control impulses and process information. Believe me, I saw that in the classroom. At higher levels, it can lead to anemia, loss of coordination, brain damage, kidney damage, all of those things, even trouble with the law, and underperformance in the workplace. The CDC recommends that children should be tested 3 times by the age of 3. WIC closed their offices during COVID and have not reopened. Some pediatricians have not seen the need or felt that they knew much about it. We believe the answer to this issue is education of parents, of healthcare providers, and the general public, and of course, more testing. We are planning to take our education and outreach efforts to the next level to recruit and train youth to participating in educating themselves and local families at events and in the communities, maybe in their neighborhoods, and we plan to coordinate with the health department and hold 2 testing sites yet this summer. I'm asking for volunteers to help us with this particular effort. Lead abatement has a huge effect on students in the classroom, and all of you know that 1 or 2 children that are causing trouble in your classrooms, you know they are acting out at times, and sometimes it might be due to lead. You've heard about my interests and what Rick is doing and why I feel called to the work. So please reach out to us if you are interested in volunteering around anything that you may be interested in. It could be just supporting a task force. You don't have to come to every meeting, but it would be great if you were planning to attend some of our meetings, and if you can see, if you put the next slide up, we could see how you can contact us. You could go onto our social media. We're on Twitter and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and so forth. You can also contact the office, or you can talk to one of us about anything you heard today. Through God's call and our faith, we are committed to the beloved community, because it is not enough to only pray and talk about what our beliefs are. We must act on them. Thank you.
This is a very typical thing right here, so bear with me for just a moment. Right? Good evening. My name is Carl Fields, and I am the co-chair of the task force that we have recently changed the name to the Transformational Justice Task Force. There we go. And I also am the director of community engagement for the Hospitality Center, which is a day shelter here in Racine, which is downtown Racine. It's a day shelter, and we operate as a soup kitchen. I also am a couple of different things. I'm an advocate of social justice. I am a person who was raised here in Racine, and the work that I do is both for myself as an impacted person, system impacted person, as we call it. I am also a person who loves this fair city and try to do a lot to increase Greater Racine's ability to live, thrive, and continue to be inclusive of all people. Amen. So I want to take the time to explain a couple things to you. And some of those things are about the task force, but also how I got involved in the task force, how I came to wisdom, and how I came to Rick, which is quite the interesting story. And as well, wanted to share with you all what it means to strive for and live in the beloved community. So I got wind of Rick long time ago, a couple decades back, when Rick was having a vigil. So my mother brought me here. My stepfather brought me here to Racine back in the 80s. And I had a good time. Originally from Chicago, Illinois, grew up here in Racine. And I'm a case man for anybody who wants to know. That question comes up a lot. So I'm from, Case High is my place. But, I had a good time. I grew up in the 80s here, grew up in the 90s here. At the end of the 90s, my mother began to struggle from a couple of different things, addiction being one of them. And she died. She died here in Racine. She was killed. And the hard part for me was that I didn't know exactly who her friends were. I wasn't connected to any of those people as a young man. But what I remember is that there were a group of people who held a vigil in her name and in her honor. And I remember Pastor Tony, for those who know Tony, strumming his guitar and singing a song in honor of this lady whom he did not know, and this organization who did not know this woman, but they were celebrating her presence and her life, and that was a big deal to them. And that was a big deal to me. I found out much later that was the Racine Interfaith Coalition, but I did notice that. And it struck me because I thought to myself, I didn't think that was a thing that people do. I didn't think that communities lift up each other because all life is precious, that the common good is something that comes out, and people find a way to work that up into their everyday existence. I didn't encounter that until that day, until that moment. And it stuck with me, and I never forgot it. I never forgot it. So my connection to Racine Interfaith Coalition is that I am what they call an ex-knucklehead. I am a formerly incarcerated person. I spent almost 20 years in prison before I released some time ago, some years back, and learning about the work that happens around the state through the organization that you heard of as Wisdom. I learned that while I was incarcerated. I also became incarcerated because of the scenario I explained to you. My mother dying, she was killed here in Racine, and she was found, her remains were found by Gateway Technical College. And I was devastated. And that put me in a funk of a place. I started making very crazy and bad choices, and that landed me in prison. But from there, one of the things that I swore I would do, one of the things that I committed to indefinitely, was that I had put a stain on her name in the city that she loves. And I was going to do everything that I could to rectify that. And I was committed to that. And so from day one, when I went to prison, I committed to the idea of changing up my life and making different choices. And so one of the things I began to look for were resources in the city that I grew up in that were already present. And again, that group that I talk about came up. I didn't realize that the treatment instead of prisons or movement, because that's what it became, that was mentioned here, became how I got to be a part of a treatment program while I was incarcerated. It's the reason why I was able to come home early. It's the reason why I was able to connect and hold true to the promise that I made while I was incarcerated, which was I would come back, and not only would I be better, but I would do better. And I was able to do that because multiple amounts of people who have learned to work their values and their faith up into their everyday lives made a whole lot of noise in order to raise a little bit of money, and that money has a ripple effect in dozens, if not hundreds of people's lives throughout the state of Wisconsin. I just happen to be one of those people that belongs to the city of Racine that it affected. And so I always mention that because I always want people to know that the work that we do here in the community, however small it appears, people notice. It stands out and it makes a difference. I saw one of the affiliate groups, which is Moses, that's part of the statewide group Wisdom, on TV while I was incarcerated. And I saw what they were doing, and I saw them, and to me, it looked no different from seeing a missionary in a third world country going up against the powers that be, fighting for somebody's dignity, fighting for somebody's respect, fighting for a chance for that person, because that person, for whatever reason, probably couldn't do it for themselves, but they certainly shouldn't have to do it by themselves. Amen. And so when I saw that, I connected with that in a way that I never had with anything else. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's the group that I want to go home and make some noise with, do some work with. Myself, I am a person who is trained in a couple of different proficiencies. One of those particular backgrounds is that cognitive development and cognitive intervention is my particular focus. Conflict resolution is the work that I do at the shelter, at the day shelter that I work in. And I know a lot of people in this room who are a part of that mission work. I do that because I have a love and a passion for it. I also believe in restorative justice principles and practices, and so that's something that we try to instill in the community and people who pass through our doors, because everybody we see, they aren't homeless. A lot of people aren't struggling for a meal, but they are sometimes, and most times, struggling for a connection and struggling for belonging. How does one connect to that kind of belonging? I also see many of people who I grew up with, who I went to school with, who are in a crisis scenario, and they come and talk to me specifically because they know me and we have a history, and they know that dignity and respect are going to be primary focuses. Those particular focuses are part of what we do with the Transformational Justice Task Force. And I explain all those things to you because I didn't understand as a young kid that I was putting myself on a certain trajectory when I made a bad choice or two. It's one thing to make a bad choice as a kid. And that's no surprise to any of us in this room, because kids make those kinds of choices. What changes things is when the legal system shifts that young person out of a community system and into a different kind of system. When you do that, when a community does that, we allow for that person to be placed into this other system, and then the community is willing to spend 3 and 4 and 5 times as much to have that young person there or adult person there and keep them there. But we're unwilling to spend even a fraction of that to have that person in the community system and keep that person in the community system. And that is social justice, or what I call social injustice 101. And that's why I always describe the work that we do as social injustice, because we should be investing in people in a way that has or bears fruit, that has or produces a certain kind of result. You've probably heard it before, but I'll say it again just in case. If the criminal justice system were a for-profit business, the kinds of results that it produces, the kinds of effectiveness rates that we see in it would be atrocious, and it wouldn't succeed as a business. It just wouldn't, and we all know that. The numbers are pretty public, and it's pretty out there. But as a nonprofit, and it funded by taxpayer dollars, it's allowed to continue in the way that it does. Today, we come to talk about both the work that we do, how that's connected to the courts, but also how it's connected to young people. I talk all the time about this particular issue, and years back at Racine Interfaith Coalition, when we started our school, what we call the School to Prison Pipeline work, that's a national phrase, and that's something that you will hear if you haven't already, how young people are connected to juvenile delinquency that's labeled in a criminal way, dealt with in a harsh criminal way, and fast tracks them into the system. And unfortunately, once you become a part of the system, legally it's set up in a certain way to keep you there. And the last thing we want is for young people who need a real opportunity to get some help that they need, to get behavior issues addressed, to help walk with that person if mental health or particular family or just societal struggle is a real thing for them. Like, we care about that because we care about what God has taught us. And we care about lifting that up into our everyday walk with God and in our community. When we talk about dealing with a young person harshly, we put them on a certain path. And that path is what we talk about as a certain trajectory. That arc, most young people who are here today are on the upswing in that arc overall. That path of going to college, that path of getting a job that you love, that path of becoming an adult and raising a family can be changed in an instant with one choice. We try to make that plain for young people. We try to make that clear for young people, but we also try to make it plain in the community that that shouldn't be their last choice that they ever get to make. Unfortunately, we know a lot of young people who made a bad choice at 14, 15, 16 years old, and now they won't come home until they're 60, 70, 80 years old. And that is just not a good investment of our dollars, of tax dollars, or the human capital. That particular trajectory, myself, I'm on the other side of that arc. I'm on the back end of that. And although I'm not a terribly old man, my kids are 23 and 22. And they tell me all the time that I don't have it anymore. I tell them I still have some style. Please bear with me. But I mention that because I have a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge, and I hope a lot of gifts to give to the community and to give to young people who are in the beginning phases of their young adult life. And we try all the time to help young people connect with people who have been there, done that. I'm one of those people, but I'm not the only one. And I also try my best to help young people reach out for help, have the courage to reach out for help when they need it, but also we as adults need to respect the fact that young people build community in a certain kind of way. We need to ask them what that is and what that looks like so that we can be supportive of that as they make their way into adulthood. We don't do enough of that. We just don't. Or we don't do it well enough. That kind of investment in young people is the kind of investment that helps them further invest in themselves. That's something that we like to do, and we come here to share with one of our partners in the work what it means for Greater Racine to work together to build what we call that beloved community. That is not something that comes easy. That is not something that comes out of nowhere, and it certainly isn't something that just happens over time. Now, what that looks like through the Transformational Justice Task Force, a young person has a hiccup in their life and they go to court. An adult person has a hiccup in their lives and they go to court. Us being present in court changes the way court systems work, and it's a fact. There are a couple of different theories about it, but the Hawthorne effect is one of them. A thing changes when you look at it. A thing shifts when you look at it. Professional people in that scenario conduct themselves in a way that they were voted in to do so when we look at them. And court observer training is about helping to produce the most just outcome, period. If a person wrongs somebody, if a person wronged a business, then justice says that something needs to be done about that. But we're talking about actual justice, not vengeance, because justice isn't vengeance. We're talking about that person or that business or that property or that community being made whole. That's not vengeance. That's something else. And we're saying to you, and I'm certainly saying to you, that we need to be paying attention to the systems that work well for us. But unfortunately, the only people who find themselves in the courtroom are the people that work there or the people who are currently under the thumb of that system, who are on the hot seat in that system. Other than that, nobody else is really there. Somebody directly connected to one party or the other is there, but no community partners are there. And certainly, if we were to go tomorrow, there would be more questions than answers by being there. That's what the training is about. The training is about helping us get some real bang for our buck in that justice system, but also helping everybody to understand when we talk about what it means to vote an elected official in the court system, what that means, what that looks like, and why that's so important. And most people don't understand why or how important that is until you watch a judge work, until you watch a prosecutor make a decision one way or another, and how quickly the courtroom changes because of what this prosecutor said. And then race comes into effect. You'll see it if you decide to have an interest or take an interest in the court observer training. You see it firsthand. You see the way that a judge speaks to a defendant in a suit and tie with his attorney who looks well-to-do, who comes prepared. And then you'll see a difference in the courtroom, a shift in the mood when a person comes shackled in orange to court and the attorney sitting next to them has a stack of paperwork this big, which tells you pretty clearly that they are one of many. And the attorney begins to speak in a way that seems like they're either ill-prepared or not at all prepared. That kind of experience, it gets in your guts and it changes you. And demanding more from a community system that we're all paying for is your right to do as a person who's part of that community. We're training people to do that because that is what produces a better outcome. And those better outcomes produce safer neighborhoods. Because I promise you, people who live in dangerous neighborhoods want safe streets just as much as anybody else. Maybe more. And are not necessarily in a position to get it. Because I can promise you, we cannot police our way out of any of these issues. But what we can do is love on each other more than we have been and learn systems better so that we can demand more from those systems. On that note, I will pass it back to the deacon.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tammy. Okay, we've heard a lot. Let's take a break, huh? Let's take a break. I invite you to go out into the narthex, stretch your legs, have a beverage, get something to eat. Our high schoolers are going to debrief a little bit and talk about what you've heard. Oh, yeah, okay. We have got some baskets out there, and each of those baskets has a name of one of the task force that you heard Linda talk about. So there's some stones out there or some beads. Take one of the beads and just put it in whatever basket you were most interested in, whatever task force you were most interested in. And then we'll use that when we come back in about 10 minutes, and that's what we'll kind of focus on and elaborate on a little bit more, as well as any questions that you might have for anybody that's been up here. Okay? See you in 10. Okay, all right, welcome back. Welcome back. If you'd like to come closer, Don is suggesting some come closer. If you can't hear, come on, move in. But the two task force that people have been interested in that we got the most votes on was, the first one was environmental task force. So maybe Linda can come up and talk a little more about that. And I've got a microphone I can bring around if somebody wants to ask a question or two. I've got a microphone there that if anybody wants to ask a question. And the other one was transformational justice. So I'll let Linda, you can maybe just talk a little bit more, and I'll go around with the microphone, and if anybody's got some specific questions they want to ask, just raise your hand and I'll come over to you with the mic.
All right, I'll give a minute for Greg to come around for questions. One of the things that I talked about, of course, was the immediate goal that we have around lead abatement. But we will also be talking about the rights of nature movement that's going across the country. Actually, it's an international movement. As you heard me say, that Australia and Ireland have recently voted in rights of nature to their constitution. We know that probably our larger focus will be around water, contamination and consumption, the chemicals that are flowing into our groundwater, water erosion, and the wells. There's, Minnesota has a law for well remediation. That is something maybe Wisconsin should look at. I have worked with a fellow over time that has a lot of information about farm country, but it isn't only farm country. It's here in our area, and we know there are many kinds of lead abatement. It's lead paint. That's the largest issue, especially for our children and their futures. But we have the pipe laterals. We have it, lead is in the earth, it's in the water, it's everywhere. Can't hear me? Oh, in the air. I saw her go like this. I thought she couldn't hear me. She meant in the air. It is all around us. Now, do you have a specific question? No questions? Right back there. Okay, if you live in the city, and I'm not sure what Caledonia and Mount Pleasant are doing, if you live in the city, you will be notified if you have an issue with pipe laterals. You could call City Hall if you live in the city, and they will let you know the areas where they will be replacing pipe laterals or where they should be placed, and they're making plans for the future. There's some money coming out of the infrastructure bill just for that issue, I've been told, so that that there will be more money available for it. We also need more plumbers. It's very intensive work, and not every plumbing group wants to take on such a big task. So that is something that there will be monies for coming, we hear, so that there will be more availability to get pipes replaced from the curb to your house, and laterals maybe even in your own backyard. We have found that sometimes in the rental properties, landlords don't always want to cooperate about receiving the notice that pipe laterals or even lead paint has to be taken care of within the homes. The school to prison pipeline is directly affected by lead. As I said, there are some problems with the law, but we know that young people, you can't cure it. Once children have been affected by lead in a small way or a large way, there's no cure for it. So it's very important. Yes? No, and that's one of the issues. They've been referred to the health department. The health department does some testing, but it really is not enough. The parents aren't aware in many cases that it even has to take place. So that's why we want to educate the health care field and parents. Some of them haven't thought about it, but it's 3 times before they're 3 years old. That's mandated by the government, by the CDC.
Linda, they called it environmental science when I was a college student, but now apparently it's conservation biology. What would you tell a young person graduating with that kind of degree, where to go, who to talk to make a difference in trying to clean up the environment for future generations? Like, where would you send them in general? Asking for my daughter, I mean for a friend.
For a friend. For a friend's daughter? I think I would go to a government agency first, or a city or a county, and see what they have available around environmental work, and see if there's something they could do in that direction. Any ideas, Tammy, on that?
Universities. UWM has a big water whole thing about the regulations and whatnot. I think many universities would also.
And Tim, We are going to get some training at Parkside about this. Rita and I are going to join a team there talking about the environmental issue across the country. There's always government, also to join in government steps. But I think universities is a good idea, specifically. Anything else? I know it's a lot. You heard?
One over here.
Yeah, I see.
I was wondering, do you have any idea how common it is for children to have some degree of lead poisoning in Racine? And then once those children are discovered, what is done to help them or to reduce their continued exposure? And then, if it is one household, do they look to other households that are nearby or the other children? Because you finally discovered something, what do you do with that information?
Right. I have a niece who's raising her children in an apartment complex over on Erie Street in that area, and they found lead in one of the apartments. The whole building had to have lead abatement done because it was built in that era before 1978. That's a very common marker, and they do have to go in and scrape it down and repaint and check the water. Usually the water is more pure maybe than the lines going in and the pipes going in. What happens is a child who has been affected ends up in our special education programs many times because they're not processing properly, maybe acting out. I use that terminology. And it can be low levels of function. A lot of attention deficit children are misdiagnosed. So the testing is really, really important. I don't know if I answered your question exactly. Well, that's the special ed. It's the cleanup. The contamination has to be cleaned up. That's mandated by law, whether you own a home or a landlord owns it. It has to be done. And then in the schools, they deal with it with special education probably.
Only real things you can do, you as a person, if this happens, nutrition, better nutrition will help alleviate some of it. You can't get rid of it. It's already in your system. It's not going to go away. But better nutrition will help, and of course filtering the water. A simple thing like a Brita water filter is helpful. Those are two things to do.
One of the things we will be doing, we have a garage full of water filters that when we go out into the community, we're going to be with some pictures and we'll be handing those out. We have had a little bit of a program going where some information has gone out. We were at Mitchell School talking to parents during one of their open houses. Parents aren't aware. It's surprising, and they should be. Riggy.
All right.
I was just going to add, one of the primary things that this lead abatement is looking at is lead paint. So anything built, painted before 1978 has high probability of having lead paint. Hand contact, this is something I learned the other day in the presentation. Touching the walls, putting them in their mouth, picking up things off the floor, chip paint. So low-income housing, poor households, marginalized households, landlord rental kind of situations where the upkeep has not been there. Now you have a situation where you have a lot of contacts, and there's a lot of homes built before 1978. And if it's low-income housing, the landlords aren't so proactive of taking care of their housing. So it creates marginalized areas where general population...
Well, it is mostly marginalized areas at some time, but you can have your home checked for lead in many ways. Don?
I think we should move on, though. This is really a long...
Okay,
but
yes.
let's get Carl and Carl.
One more thing. If you would like to be involved at all with this, come to a meeting, learn more about it, be involved in our outreach of talking about what is going on in our community, please reach out to us. The RIC number is 262-635-9532, and you can talk to us. But I think the more people we have getting the message out, the better it can be for our children and for our community as they grow.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate your interest. Really wanted to get a sense of, just wanted to put out there that, the Transformational Justice Group really took on initially we took on the school to prison pipeline work, and then that was then shared with the educational task force. When we came back out, post-COVID, we started the court observer training piece, and that's interesting to a lot of different people, but I try to explain to a lot of folks when we talk that if you want an understanding of your community and how it works, talk to somebody who's struggling in that community. I mean, how we treat the least of us says the most about us, in my view, and in our Christian view as well. And one of the places that you see a person cycling in and out of is the court system. And so to get a sense of what that is and how that works is a big deal. And so I just wanted to say that. We certainly can open the floor up for questions if there were a particular question or two, or even just a general statement. I'll happily respond to that as well.
What is the current actual cost, general cost for a person to be incarcerated per year? And can you project what it costs our community to lose their life by not coming out, in terms of what that does to the community in terms of lost revenue?
Sure. There are some numbers out that talk about how what we invest in prevention programs, every dollar we spend, we save $3. And that sort of cost-benefit analysis has to happen, and it has to have legs. It has to be able to stand on its own. But that sort of approach and that sort of policy shift isn't politically sexy. It doesn't get you elected, and that's a hard sell because of that. It costs between the numbers have always been between $32,000 and $34,000, but that number shifted some time ago, and it's between $33,000 and $45,000 a year per person to keep a person incarcerated, and that number is double that when we're talking about a person under 18 in the juvenile category. It costs upwards of $100,000 per year because of the intense type of assistance that they need, programming that's offered, and the fact that it's an underage person, so there are a lot of protections that go along with having them housed and incarcerated. Those are costs that are exorbitant in the way that communities that put forth those dollars could be using that money elsewhere. Absolutely, that is a Harvard that is an Ivy League education with that amount of money. But we are hesitant to spend any significant amount of money on the front end because it smacks of perhaps a different kind of system. I won't get into that here, but we need to be investing in young people in a way that makes sense, and we need to be doing that in a courageous way. And for me, one of the things that we hear the most of in working with people in community engagement is we need safe streets, or we need communities that feel connected, and we're willing to spend any kind of amount of dollar to make streets safe, even though we can prove that our current scenario and the way that we've been spending our tax dollars isn't the way. If we want to talk to elected officials to see to it that we have safe streets, then what we should be doing is talking to the elected officials who are tasked specifically with that duty. That is the judge who is elected and the prosecutor who is elected. And we need to be getting a sense of how they do their jobs. And when they say we don't have the means or the resources to change the system that we work in, then we talk to the broader elected officials to talk about why aren't there other programs that go along with that? Why aren't there alternative programs that this money that they'd like to divert is going to? Because ultimately, a lot of people in elected positions, some people in bureaucratic positions feel like that's their money and their budget when we all know that's the people's money, because those are tax dollars. And what we want is some real bang for our buck for that money. That produces public safety. That produces the ability to walk down the street and be okay. I saw a hand back here. Young man, did your hand go up, sir? I don't mean to call you out, but I saw your hand. That would be you. Oh, okay. All right. I just want to be sure, want to give you some priority if that were the case. That's all. All right. Anybody else? All right. Oh, one more hand there.
I want us to end on a positive note in a sense of what the Catholic Church has done to support Rick. And I don't know if Tammy or Linda can answer that question best in terms of what the Campaign for Human Development and our parishes that are members,
the CCHD.
How much of that helps?
We have been getting funding from CCHD for pretty much our entire 30 years. And if you're familiar with how the funding goes, you can get 6 years in a row, and then you have to lay off for 3 years, not even apply, and then you can be eligible again. And so for pretty much all of our history, we have been getting CCHD grants. And looking, they come for site visits, and we submit what we are doing and whatnot, but we've been very blessed with CCHD grants. Sure. They started off with $25,000 a year, and they're up to $50,000 a year. It's our major funders.
Indeed.
Also, we have a number of local Catholic churches who are members of Racine Interfaith, St. Richard's, St. Patrick's, Sacred Heart, this church, the Dominicans. I think that's it, right? We always are looking for new members to do the work. Yes, sir, back there.
Catholic Campaign for Human Development.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I remember for a long time.
Last year was the 50th anniversary.
The monies are going down because Catholic numbers are going down. And priorities are going down. This kind of work.
Okay, all right. So before we end in prayer, I just want to have a few more comments. Thank you to Tammy and Linda and Carl for coming out tonight and informing us on what Rick does and calling us to get involved in our community. I'd like to thank Father Michael for all his support, his help in getting these talks going and coming here and showing up and welcoming everybody. Thank you, Father Michael. I'd like to thank Chuck Janzer for all the technology. He's here. He's just been doing a lot to make these things happen. So thanks to Chuck. Of course, the office staff here, Karen, Kathy, Suzanne Cruz, of the parish staff. I'd also like to thank Diane Laro for some of the communications work that she did. And, of course, all the human concerns people for all the work that they've been doing throughout the year to make each one of these things happen. So thank you very much for all your work. And thank all of you for attending tonight. Thank you to coming out and trying to integrate this into your identity, and a Catholic identity. This is some of the stuff that we don't always hear so much about, but it is part of our tradition. It is part of who we are. So you have an important role in building the kingdom, right? You have an important role in building the kingdom of God, right? The harvest, as Jesus told us, the harvest is abundant. From Matthew's gospel, the harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. And that is certainly true today. We have a hard time getting volunteers. So we need people to please consider any of our great ministries that we have here at this parish. There are many of them. We'd love to have you on human concerns or any of them. Rick, as you heard tonight, needs people. Really, please consider that. And next, I think we have a slide here. The next one will be on the call to family, which is a really important topic. So we just dedicated one talk on that May 21st. And that'll be the last one for the year. Love and Justice Breakfast next week, this Saturday coming up, 8 to 10. So, okay, and there'll be a collection next week here at St. Rita at all the masses next weekend for Rick to help supplement the parish's membership fee. So there's There are envelopes in the narthex there that you can put a donation in and put it in the collection basket at Mass, one of the Masses next weekend. So that's it. Susan is going to close us in prayer. Susan?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, Lord of all times and seasons, with grateful hearts and minds, we recall your constant presence in our lives, shaping our families and our beloved community over these many years. Years of war and peace, seasons of growth and vitality, times of struggle, and times of hope. As we gather to reflect upon our Catholic social teaching this evening, renew the spirit of holiness in our midst. Enable us to proclaim the gospel of Christ in fresh words and daring new deeds. Inspire us to develop a spirit of service and discipleship, strengthened by the Eucharist we share and by your mercy in the sacrament of reconciliation. Enable us to be signs and instruments of your truth, your justice, and your peace. Renew our dreams and hopes. Keep us safe from adversity, bold in our actions, confident in your loving, life-giving presence now and forever. We offer this prayer through Mary, Mother of the Church, and our patron, Saint Rita of Cascia. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I was your